There's a whole story about the
הפח נשבור ואנחנו נמלוט. ברכת דיין האמת כבר אמרת?
לא משנה.
אז עכשיו אתה תגיד, אתה בן, נכון?
כן.
ברוך אתה.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם דיין האמת.
תקרא כלפי מטה. די. אפשר להתחיל. תגיד לך כאן.
זה צריך?
לא, אתה צריך להחזיק את זה ביד.
Make sure they can hear in the States. They can hear? Okay, you can see? Okay, fine. On behalf of my mother and my sister and my brother who could not be here, unfortunately, I want to just start by thanking the staff at the Buckingham Pavilion Nursing Home and the Stern family in particular, and Monica Magid, who's here sort of as a representative, for the tremendous care and devotion they gave my father for the last 16 months of his life. We could not as a family have asked for a more dedicated and warm and concerned staff, so we all thank you from the bottom of our hearts. My father, Harini Kaprat Mishkovo, was born in 1933 in Chicago. He lived his entire life in Chicago, except for a time in the army and the time that he and my mother spent here in Eretz Yisrael, which was, as my brother will discuss later, some of their fondest moments. He lived a very full life, we would say in Hebrew, maleh v'gadush ba'asiyah. And in that spirit, I remember him telling us several years ago that he didn't trust my sister and my brother and I to write his hespedim. He said, you guys are going to be all teary and all sad. He said, my funeral should be a celebration of my life. He said, he worked until he was 82 years old. It was only the Parkinson's that forced him to retire. He said, I couldn't have done any more in my life, and it's true, he could not have. And we're grateful for that. He said to me, people shouldn't say, I'm sorry for your loss when the time comes, but they should say, wow, I'm jealous for what you had. And I think we all feel that way. So it's very fitting that my father died during Chodesh Nisan, is being buried now in Rosh Chodesh Iyar, Aleph Rosh Chodesh Iyar, when there are no eulogies, because he didn't want eulogies. And so instead of eulogies, my brother and sister and I and one of the representative of the grandchildren will just share a couple of stories and some of his accomplishments, and to celebrate really a tremendous life and tremendous asiyah that he did. I don't know if there's a word in English, accomplishments in this world. So first my brother Jeffrey, who's in Dallas, will speak. Hopefully.
Before I give a few at my father's funeral, before I give a few remarks, I want to speak for Mom or Bobby. She won't be speaking today, but she wanted everybody to know that Dad was her partner of 65 years, whom she loved deeply. She will especially miss his love, companionship, and partnership in caring for their kids, grandkids, and as super Zaidi to their great-grandkids, whom they both love deeply and care for. For myself, for me, Dad was a Renaissance man. When he was practicing medicine, he went on to go to law school from which he graduated. He turned his law degree in three ways. First, representing the Lutheran General medical staff, whom he cared for greatly. Second, in analyzing the National Insurance Commissioner's data on medical injury and working with them to uncover the causes of medical injury. That in turn led to him traveling around the state of Illinois with his pilot, Dr. Rosenberg, and around the nation where he gave talks to physicians, helping them to understand the causes of medical injury or medical malpractice and helping them to avoid those practices. Finally, he used his degree to help patients and hospitals develop informed consent procedures that allowed full understanding for patients and doctors of what was going to be happening to them. At age 69, an age when most people are content in retiring, he sold his medical practice and fulfilled his lifelong dream of receiving a degree from Harvard. The master's in public health that he earned, he used to help on various initiatives, both for Lutheran General, with whom he had a very, very long and loving relationship, but also the medical system as a whole. Specifically, he worked to reduce the insurance cost of care for pregnant women. He worked on implementing procedures for doctors to clean their hands before touching a patient. He also worked on the right procedure, right person initiatives and the safer surgery initiatives. So next time when you're asked at a hospital or in a doctor's office for your name, date of birth, what procedure you're having, and what part of your body is being affected, think of my dad, because he is the reason that those procedures exist. Dad, as a Renaissance man, wasn't just a Renaissance man in the medical field. In Judaism, he created his own Haggadah, something that was a lifelong effort for him to understand Yetziat Mitzrayim. And when his father died, he learned to lead the davening, which he often did at the shul Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel that he loved. No words would be complete without mentioning my dad's love of family and his generosity. More than anything else, he loved Mom and cared deeply for her. But he also had extraordinary love for his kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. He was extremely generous with them and was first to meet any need that any of them might have. One story illustrates his love, and you'll hear more about this, but two of his grandkids over Pesach, when we were staying at their house, took the keys to his dresser. Dad, once he figured it out, quickly forgave them, and that was a deep-seated example of his love. Dad, you will be deeply missed by all, including me, but especially your grandkids and great grandkids, Lutheran General Hospital, and the broader medical community, but also by me. Love you, Dad.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And now some words from my sister, Debbie.
I just want to share a couple of stories about my dad. As a lead up to Jeffrey's bar mitzvah, our family became more involved at Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel. This was transformative in my family's life in so many ways. One was our first trip to Israel. We toured for 3 weeks and saw all of Israel, including almost every church, with our Jewish tour guide. Dad fell in love with Israel and recorded it with thousands of slides, which he shared with his friends in long viewing sessions. Dad's love for Israel became the basis for his founding and involvement in Allergists for Israel. It also led to his and Mom's purchase of an apartment in Israel. The apartment was awesome. We all loved to use it as our home base when we traveled there. They were so proud to own land in Israel. Our Israel trip was the lead-in to Mom and Dad's foray into international travel. They made it to every continent: Australia, Antarctica, Galapagos, China, Morocco, and the Amazon. But their favorite place was always Israel. Mom and Dad decided to send me to Ramah in preparation for going to Ida Crown. Dad was so excited when I came home to hear new tunes to Shir Hamalot and to try and start singing Zmirot on Shabbat, despite our bad voices. Dad was never one for half measures. As we started school at Ida Crown, he got involved too. He worked his way up to chairman of the board. He used to tell us he was signed on to more loans than the current debt in the United States. When Dad decided to go back to school to get his law degree, he announced it to us by telling us that this exciting new venture would give us more family time, as we would all be able to study together. You can't get more motivating by example than this. After participating in its formation, I remember Dad bringing home bags and bags of medical samples that he brought to the ARC where he ran a weekly clinic. I was initially pre-med in college, but when I shadowed in an emergency room, I found it made me nauseous. I knew medicine wasn't for me. As always, I went to my dad for advice. He was pragmatic as usual and immediately suggested that I get my MBA. He thought I would do great in business. As always, Dad was right. Dad found a medical conference in Hawaii that he thought would be great for Kenny, me, and the girls to join him and Mom at. Dad spent lots of time in the pool with the girls and took it upon himself to teach Jennifer and Jessica how to swim. His 3 granddaughters entertained Mom and Dad with their expert hula dancing. Everything Dad put his mind to, he succeeded at. He started by buying a book about anything he wanted to learn about. When going through the house over Shabbat, we found books that he had bought on topics ranging to learning to speak Hebrew, to interpreting the Megillah, to trading stocks, to, of course, a million books on medical ethics and public health from his master's degree that he got from Harvard at age 69, but no books on cooking. Dad wasn't athletic, but he ran a marathon. He chose the nicest place he could think to run it at, Hawaii. Dad decided he didn't like the standard Haggadahs that were on the shelf, so he decided to write his own. He and Jeffrey spent months putting together a binder full of stories and commentaries that we then used for our family Seder. Dad lectured across the country, speaking many weekends out of the year. Dad wasn't a natural speaker. He took a course on how to speak and then spent hours and hours writing his speeches and practicing them, including standing in front of a mirror. When we needed to make a speech or a presentation, Dad was always there to give us expert advice on how to give a great speech. The highlight of our family memory was a family trip to Jasper, Canada for Mom and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary. The whole family stayed together for a week in a magnificent setting with amazing food and, even more importantly, family time. Dad had Mom by his side for 65 years. She was his helper and the real power behind the throne. They were a match that set the standard for all of our generations. These stories help explain how I got to be who I am today. Dad, you are back at home in Israel, the land you fell in love with so many years ago. I love you.
Thank you, Debbie. The grandchildren, as you've heard, were a major part of my father's life and my mother's life. They still are, and they should be for many years, Bezrat Hashem. The grandchildren got together and shared a bunch of stories, and Tovia, as the youngest of the 10 grandchildren, Bli Ayin Hara, will share some of those stories on behalf of all of the grandchildren. Tovi.
There is a concept in public health called people years. Zaidi Alav Shalom was zochet to be a Zaidi for 270 people years. He made the most of those years to teach, inspire, guide, and love each of his grandchildren and super grandchildren. This is a compilation of memories from all of his grandchildren that really come together to show how amazing of a Zaidi he was to each and every one of us. As a child, Zaidi was always down for a good joke. He loved making us laugh by signing all of his credit card receipts as Donald Duck, when he went out to dinner together just to see us all smile. As an adult, I remember Zaidi always making jokes around the Yom Tov table. He was always smiling and joking around to help enhance our simcha. My favorite Zaidi joke is that when he would fall asleep on the couch, he would claim to be studying the notes he wrote on the back of his eyelids. He always had a quick and witty response that could garner smiles from everyone around. Many memories I have growing up was watching Bubby's and Zaidi's devotion to going to shul together. He would always leave early together before shul began. However, one thing I always noticed as a teenager and older was not what time they got to shul, but how they walked to and from shul. I have distinct memories of Zaidi placing his arm out for Bubby to place her arm in his for their walks home from shul. It seems like such a silly memory, but it really spoke to me about the love and respect Zaidi had for Bubby and their marriage. It inspires me daily in my relationship to work to that level of love, commitment, and respect to one another. When I was younger, I thought it would be the coolest thing to spend a Shabbat alone at Bubby's and Zaidi's. Quality time, just me and them. I remember Zaidi picking me up from school and stopping off at the hospital with him so he could check on a few things. When other doctors in the doctor's lounge asked, "Which granddaughter is this?" I knew about all of his grandchildren and family. It really made me feel special. That the pride he had for each one of his grandchildren and their accomplishments was extraordinary and felt by many around him. As an adult, I would come to Zaidi often for life advice. When I started thinking about getting my master's in public health, I spoke with him about it in great detail before applying for the program. He was initially very excited about it, but also worried about how it would affect me as a physician. We spoke many times about whether getting my master's in medical school would help or hurt my medical learning. I loved having talks with Zaidi about what I was learning in school and hearing stories from when he was getting both his MD and MPH and swapping stories. I'm lucky that I had the opportunity to get to know my Zaidi as both a loving, fun, amazing Zaidi, but also an amazing, widely respected professional in both medical and public health aspects of his career. I'm sure many people know Zaidi was a good dresser, but he was also extremely fashionable, and aside from all of other great memories I have of him, that's something that I remember really well. He taught me how to tie a tie, and had some impressive cufflinks, and also just presented himself professionally always. One time specifically, I came with a wrinkled shirt to Bubby and Zaidi's house for Chag, and decided to steam it up and strain it because I always hated the sight of any wrinkles in my clothes. Zaidi came over to me and told me that he was exactly the same when he was my age, and that I got it from him. I know it isn't the most profound of memories, and it's not the biggest part of our relationship I cherish, but in Melachim Aleph it says, in the small, still voice, Kol Dmama Daka, is where we connect regularly. Whenever I get dressed up for anything and put on a suit and tie, or whenever I steam or iron a shirt, I think of him, and I'm sure I will love him and will miss dearly each time. We always remember the time that we slept over at Bubby and Zaidi's, and they took us to see iRobot and IMAX at Navy Pier. It was clear that they totally hated the movie, but it was also clear that they loved being there with us. At the end of the day, it didn't matter how bad a movie it was, which as it turns out was actually pretty bad. But Bubby and Zaidi were just so happy that we were having a good time, which really speaks to the type of grandparents Bubby and Zaidi are, and the type of grandpa Zaidi was. That being able to spend time with family was always the most important thing, even if it meant putting up with a not so great movie in the process. After we got married, we were zoche to spend Shabbases with Bubby and Zaidi. It always impressed me that Zaidi never started a meal without thanking Bubby, not only for the delicious food, but for the tremendous effort she made to make Shabbos beautiful. On Fridays, Matan would drive Zedi around Jerusalem to run the Erev Shabbos errands. When they would go to the flower store, as Zedi asked, even though Matan would always offer to take care of it himself and go buy the flowers, Zedi always declined, saying that he wanted to pick out the flowers himself because he knew what Bubby loved the most. Bubby and Zedi made their grandchildren one of their top priorities. They took each of their grandchildren on a special trip when they finished high school in order to get to know them better, to share an adventure, and as Zedi would joke, to undo all the mistakes their parents made. It was so important to have this special time together with each one of us, that when they saw that it would become more and more difficult for Zedi to travel, they decided to take me on my trip early, even though I was only 13. It was an amazing trip and a memory I will cherish forever.
It's true, as you've heard throughout, that it's almost impossible to speak about my father, without speaking about my mother. They really were a team, a tzemed chemed, for over 65 years. And for that we're grateful. And we'll continue to enjoy Bubby's company with us for many, many years to come, Bezrat Hashem. About 45 or 50 years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, my parents held a sort of costume party. Come as what you always wanted to be. And I was a young boy, but I remember my father dressed up as a symphony conductor, orchestra conductor. That had been his dream. He had actually acted in the opera as a child, and culture, but the symphony and the orchestra were really passions for him. He'd always wanted to be a symphony conductor. I think that from what you've heard and from what we've all experienced, we know that he succeeded tremendously in being the conductor of a tremendous symphony. Outside of the family as well, but mostly in the family. Yesterday we read the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai u'masro liYoshua, Yoshua l'zkenim l'Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. The passing on of the Masorah, especially for my parents who were not zoche to anywhere near the kind of education that my brother and sister and I had, was of the utmost importance to them, and they did it incredibly well. I just want to share one story that really, in my mind, encapsulates this. When my daughter Abigail was about, 6 or 7 years old, she came to me one day and she said, Abba, how do we know this is all true, that God really exists and he gave the Torah and Sinai to Moshe, and how do we know this? I had no idea how to answer her, honestly. And I called my father, the seat of all wisdom. And without even thinking, he said, that's simple. 4 words. I said, 4 words? What? My father never lied. That's it. Since Har Sinai until now, my father never lied. I got the Masorah from his father, from my father, and him from his father, and so on. My father never lied. And that's what I told Abigail, that's what I've told all my kids, and they've heard the story 1,000 times. My parents have given us the Masorah, Baruch Hashem, and we've passed it on, I hope, to our children and now to our grandchildren. The conductor might not be here anymore, but his symphony is beautiful and lives on in all of us. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom.
פרק ט"ז בתהילים. מכתום לדוד שומרני כיכוסי סיבוך אומרת לה אדוני אדוני אותו תויבוסי בלולכו לקדושים אשר באורץ עמו ודירי כל חפציבום עיר בו עצבו ישמח ארמור ובלסיך נזכם מידום ובלסוס שמו ישום על סנוסוי אדוני מנס חלקי וחויסיית אותו מכגוירו לי אבולים נופלו לי בנים ממף נחלס שופרו לוי אבורכס אדוני אשר יהיה אוצוני אף לילוי סיסרוני חיליוי סוי גיביסי אדוני לנגדי סומית כי ימיני בלמוי לא כן אסומך ליבי ויוגל כבודי הבשור ישכן לו בטח כי לא יישא זוי ונפשי לשאול לא יסיתן חסיד כל לירוי שוחס דוי די אני אוי לך חיים סוי ואסמוכי זסקונכו ואימויס בימינכו
גדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ואלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי בכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולמי עולמי יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי בקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושיבתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום במרומה והוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן
לפי מנהג ירושלים כל יוצאי חלציו הבן הנכדים הנכדות לא ילכו אחר המיטה
7-5
לחכות בבקשה הבן נכדים ונכדות שתי נכדות יש
בואו נשמע
וינו אדוני אלוהינו עלינו מעשה ידינו כוננו עלינו מעשה ידינו כוננו יושב בסתר עליון בצל שדייס לינו נאמר לאדוני מחסי ומצודוסי אלוהי יפתח בוי כי הוא יצילך מפח יכוש מדבר אבויס בברוסו יוסך לוך וסחס כנופוב תחסד צינו וסויחירו אמיתוי לא יסירו מפחד לא מחצה ופיו עמום מדבר בו יפל יהלוך מכתב ישוד צורויים יפול מצדכו אלף ורבבו מימינכו אילך לא יגוש רק בעינך סבית ושילומס רשעים תראה כי אתו אדוני מחסי עליון שמתו מעינךו לא יסעוני לכו ונגע לא יקרב באוהלךו כי מלוכו ויצא ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרוכךו על כפיים יסעונכו פן תיגוי בו אבן רגלךו על שחל ופסן תדרוך תרמויס כפיר וסנין נביחו שק ואפלתהו אסגבהו כי יודע שמי יקרואיני ועיניו עמו אנוכי בצורו אכלצהו ואכבדהו אוירך יומי משביעהו והריהו בישועשי עקביו בן מהללל לא ימר יסתכל בשלושה דבורים ועינתו בו לידי אבירו דע מאין בוסו ולענתו ילך ולפני מיעתו עושית ליתן דין וחשבון מאין בוסו סרוחו ולענתו ילך למקום אפור עמו בסוילאו ולפני מיעתו עושית ליתן דין וחשבון לפני מלך מלכי המלוכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, והוא רחום יכפר עווין ולא ישחיס, וירבו להושיב אפוי ולא יועיר כל חמוצוי. יש מישהו מהצדדים?
ויקדש ברבה, מדירה פירוטי, וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ויומכון וחי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. ישמע רבה, יתברך וישתבח ויבר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי בקדושה בריחו, אלא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה ונחמתה אדם מבן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. השלם הרבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. זה שלום ורומה ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
אמן. יושב בסייסר עליון בצל שדייס לינו נאמר לאדוני מחסי ומצודו עשי אלוהי יבטח בוי, כי הוא יצילך מפח יכוש מדבר הבויס, בעברוסו יוסך לך וסחס כנופו תכסה צינו וסריחירו אמיתוי, לא יסירו מפחד לא מחצה ופיו עמום, מדבר בו יפל יהלוך מכתב ישוד צורויים, יפול מצדך אלף ורבבו מימינך, אילך לא יגוש רק בעינך סבית, ושילו מס רשעים תראה כי אתה אדוני מחסי עליון שמתו מעינך, לא יצאו נילך רו ונגע לא יקרב באוהלך, כי מלוכו ויצא ולוך לשמורך בכל דרכך, עלי כפיים ישאונך פן תיגוי בו אבן רגלך, עלי שחל ופסן תדרוך תרמוס כפיר וסנין, כי בחושק ואפלתהו אסגבהו כי עוד אשמי, יקרואני בעיניהו עמו אנוכי בצורה חלצהו ואכבדהו, אורך יומי משביעהו והריהו בישועתי. הקביו בן מעלה לא ימר, הסתכל בשלושה דברים ועינתו בו לידי אווירו, דע מאין בוסו ולאנתו ילך, ולפני מי עתו עושיד ליתן דין וחשבון, מאין בוסו סבוכו ולאנתו ילך למקום אפור רימו וסוילאו, ולפני מי עתו עושיד ליתן דין וחשבון, לפני מלך מלכי המלוכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, והוא רחום יכפר עווין ולא ישחיס, וירבו להושיב אפוי ולא יועיר כל חמוצוי.
תכנסו לכאן, תכנס לכאן. אני מגיע לשם, כן, רגע. מצוין, צביקי כנס. אם אתה מי ידם קדיס?
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה חיותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי בכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולמי עולמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי בקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה, תאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
דוד זאב בן
דוד זאב בן אברון אליעזר.
מלוך יצא
מלוכו יצא ולא.
הוא רחום יכפר רבן ולא ישחס. תבוא לו שיבה כוי ולא ישחס.
והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ירחיק, וירבה להשיב אפוי ולא יועיר כל חמוסוי. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, וירבה להשיב אפוי ולא יועיר כל חמוסוי. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, וירבו להושיב אפוי ולא יועיר כל חמוסוי. חיים, תניח. את הצד הזה, לא את הצד ההוא. הצד הזה תסגור אצלך. כן. מכתום לדוד שומרני אל כיחוסי סיבוך אומר פלה אדוני אותו תיבוסי בלולכו לקדושים אשר באורץ אימו ואדירי כל חפצי בו עיר בו עצבו יסום אחר מורו בלסיך נזכם מידום ובלסויס שמו יסום על ספוסוי אדוני מנס חלקי וחויסי עתו תומיך גוירו לי חבול אם נופלו לי בנים אם אפנח לס שופרו אלוי אבורך אס אדוני אשר יעוצון יפלי אלוהי סיסרוני חיליו יסוי שיביסי אדוני לנגדי סומד כי ימיני בלמוית לא כן סומך ליבי ויוגל כבודי הבשורי שכן לו בטח כי לא יישא זויב נפשי לשוי לא יסיתן חסיד חולי רויס שוחס תוידי איני אוירח חיים סויבס מוחס אספונכו נעימויס בימינכו נצח. איפה הבן? בוא תתקרב לכאן. אותו מעשה אותו קדיש.
גדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה חיותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי בכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עולמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי תקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום עממה והוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
דוד זאב בן אברהם אליעזר בשם החברה קדישה, בשם המשפחה, הקרובים, הידידים והמלווים אנו מבקשים ממך סליחה ומחילה שמחס וחלילה פגענו בכבודך הן בטהרה, בנשיאת המיטה ובתיקון הקבר אנא סלח לנו כי אין זו אלא שגגה. החברה קדישה נהגה איתך כמנהגי ירושלים עיר הקודש. תהיינה מליץ יושר עבור משפחתך, קרוביך וידידיך ועבור כל כלל ישראל בכל תפוצות ישראל. ויתן השם ויבולה המוות לנצח ומחה השם אלוקים דמעה מעל כל פנים ובא לציון גואל במהרה וימינו אמן. לך בשלום ותנוח בשלום ותעמוד לגורלך לקיץ הימים. כשנצא מחוץ לחלקה באזור הכביש נעשה 2 שורות גברים לניחום אבלים לבן.
Could have done. I never followed the guy with the light. I heard that he wants to daven at home. Yeah, it's the third
קדימה. להתקדם עוד, להתקדם עוד. זהו, לעצור, לעצור. הצד הזה תתקרבו קצת. הצד הזה להתקרב. להתקרב, עוד, עוד. המקום ינחם אתכם בתוך שאר אבלי ציון וירושלים. לסגור את השורה כדי שלא יעברו אבליהם.
המקום ינחם אתכם בתוך שאר אבלי ציון וירושלים.